I call to order the December 4th, 2019 special meeting of the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission. We'll begin tonight's commission hearing with the Pledge of Allegiance. Vice Chairperson Kaufman, would you like to lead it?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving to the General Administration Function Part 1 of our agenda, we have item 1A, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission. Madam Clerk, are there any presentations by the public?
There are none.
Thank you. Seeing none, we move on to item 1B, Commissioner Communications. Commissioners, are there any communications at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. There were 2 items of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. Commissioners, does anyone wish to pull any item from the consent agenda? I just wanted to point one item then before moving on. If we could pull item 2, which is a copy of the minutes from last month's meeting. Reviewing it, I noticed, I think, an error on it. For entry number 3, it's here in the presentation on the co-location agreement. It has a motion by Commissioner Zimmer, and it lists Commissioner Wetzel as a no. I believe he was not a no, though, so I just wanted to confirm with my fellow commissioners. Do they see that item on their draft copy of the minutes, or is it just me?
It might have been this. It might have been a second. I think he.
I agree. I think he may have been the second. And if he's not here today, but just for his sake, I wanted to make sure we had it right on the record.
Speaking for him.
Oh, yeah, that was.
That was a typo.
Don't mean to
So,
call
no,
anyone out.
and you're correct. I didn't notice that. Yeah, it was as I was spacing.
Just wanted
So
to
it's
make sure.
definitely, it was his second, Wetzel.
Hearing that, that was the only thing I wanted to comment on the consent agenda.
Okay.
Unless anyone else has a comment, I would just move to make that minor correction. If there's a motion to approve the consent agenda, I'm willing to entertain it. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Vice Chairperson Kaufman and a second from Commissioner Zimmer. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Thank you. Moving on then to the regular agenda portion for tonight, we have item number 4, presentation on city responses to transportation-related service requests.
Good evening. I'm John Robinson. I'm Deputy City Manager. I was asked to help with this staff report from a performance metrics perspective. I am no expert on potholes, however, so I'm hoping that Jesse or someone who is shows up behind me while I'm speaking. If not, I think I've osmotically obtained some pothole knowledge, so hopefully I can respond to your questions at the end of the presentation. The city receives pothole and other street-related service requests from a number of sources, including telephone calls, people actually walking into the South River Road location and vocally complaining about potholes, but predominantly through the West Sac Connect app that's available both on the website and as a phone app. In terms of the number of inquiries, we looked at that over the past year, spanning from October 2018 to this October. There were 600 inquiries in general related to streets, and of those, about 321 related to potholes specifically. Those resulted in over 500 work orders, and about 176 of those were for potholes, and the disparity of the number is because more than one pothole can get addressed by a work order, and that also doesn't account for non-public stuff related inquiries. In terms of the timing of when the requests come in, there is a definite seasonal component. You can see in attachment 1, we've got it in a table in the report and also graphically, but there's most of the potholes tend to come in between January and about May, which makes sense because that's when the rain is causing the pavement to deteriorate more rapidly and people seem to notice more during that time of year. We've got an attachment here that shows the location of, sort of relative frequency of potholes, and it's a little all over the place. It was kind of hard to put that together visually in a way that made a ton of sense. We tried to do kind of a zoom in. You can start to see some patterns though, Southport Parkway, Jefferson, Industrial, West Capitol Avenue. So a lot of areas, probably not coincidentally, where there's a lot of truck traffic and traffic in general. So you've got, more tonnage on the roads, deteriorating the roads faster, and there's more traffic, so more people to notice the potholes, and thus more complaints in those locations. I think my understanding is the main interest of the inquiry that you all made was relative to the timing and sort of the mechanisms for how the city goes about repairing those. I did talk to the Public Works Operations staff about how they do that. When a complaint comes in, or an inquiry, depending on the mechanism, it goes to a staff person. There's several people that might receive it, but it goes to a staff person who's responsible for coordinating their response. And the basic approach is to go out and look at the pothole physically to see if it's causing a dangerous condition. So if it comes in on West Sac Connect or however, a member of the Public Works Operations staff goes out and physically looks at the pothole. If it's deemed to be a safety hazard, then they repair those within, they say, 3 days generally. So, and they'll put a barricade or they'll put something out there if there's a cone or whatever to keep people from falling into it while they're working on that. But it's generally a 3-day repair period for a safety related pothole. And then other potholes that are more kind of aesthetic they kind of batch those and do those on a monthly schedule. So depending on the time of the month in which the complaint is submitted, that could be a number of weeks until one of those is corrected. There are some, the Public Works Operations people they're putting more asphalt into potholes now than they have ever. So substantively, street repair work is happening in a greater volume than it has historically, but that's not necessarily tracking with how residents feel about the condition of the streets. And there's some ongoing process improvements underway to kind of bring those things back in sync. And I've listed some of those in the staff report. Part of the issue there is that, as a practical matter, the staff down there improvised some techniques that were ideal for getting things in motion quickly for them, but were maybe not ideal from a communication standpoint with the public. So one of the things they're working on is better response messaging within West Sac Connect, so that when someone does submit one of those complaints, right now the process that person might get back a response that says, "Thanks, we'll put it on our list," period. And they're not sure when they've received that, they're not sure if it's, when they don't see it fixed in 3 days or 5 days, that could seem like they've been forgotten. It could seem like we didn't care. So there's some work underway to have kind of a better canned message in there that would explain more clearly when, give the person a more realistic expectation of when that pothole that they complained about might be repaired. They're also going to leave the West Sac Connect case open. The practice to date has been to receive that, send the message, close the case, organize the team, open a work order, do the work, close the work order. So from a data perspective, like when I was preparing to put this report together, what you have is a series of West Sac Connect cases that are open for a day and a series of work orders that are also open for a day, but it's not immediately clear how much time elapsed in between, and it's hard to go back and connect the individual pothole back to the West Sac Connect case from which it originated, because the work orders batch together the potholes. So again, that was something That was a system issue that just evolved in terms of getting potholes done faster, but from a data perspective, that was made it harder to track their performance. So they're going to leave the West Sac Connect case open and then go back and close it when the actual work order for the work to correct that pothole gets done. So the resident will have a sense, they'll get an email that says, okay, we got it. And that then the amount of time that the West Sac Connect case is open will actually correspond to the amount of time it took to fix the pothole. We're also working on some educational materials, so there'll be in future pothole complaints that come in through West Sac Connect, we'll have a canned response in there that will have a link to a web page that we're going to develop that we'll put on the Public Works Operations website that will have sort of background information about how potholes work and what the city's practices are with those, and some telephone numbers for further information, so there'll be less chance of the resident feeling kind of disconnected from the pothole complaint. There he is. Cool. And then finally, we're going to have, from an internal standpoint within the city manager's office, we're going to have some more training. One of the issues that can arise is that the menu that we've created within West Sac Connect can confuse residents, and then they end up submitting their pothole complaint to the wrong office, and so it's kind of a double whammy. The menu confuses the resident, they submit it to the wrong place, and then the person that receives that, in some instances, has not been trained properly on how to redirect a case that wasn't intended for them, so sometimes very unfairly to them, the Public Works Operations people get the complaint and it's already 3 months old or something like that, so there's already sort of a pre-disgruntlement that has happened. And we're gonna try and address that too. So I guess in short, that's where the performance is now. We've got several things in the hopper that we're thinking will address some of the concerns that we know residents have had. And thankfully Jesse is here now. If you have any questions about substantively what Public Works is doing on potholes, he can address those, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have about the report.
Great, thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Yep.
Commissioners, at this time, are there any questions or comments for city staff? Well, I'll kick off the conversation then. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for this report. I found it really helpful and informative to see not just the breakdown by month, but the breakdown by neighborhood. And it's really great to see that West Sac Connect is being used, it looks like, across neighborhoods, across the city as a whole, which means that the word is out there.
Yeah.
I was wondering, before diving deeply, specifically into the report, what efforts the city does to let residents be aware that West Sac Connect is out there as a resource? Was it when it was first launched, or has there been efforts over the course of the past year?
Wow, that's a good, things are supposed to have happened. I want to be careful of representing that they have. In theory, we have kind of in our community relations shop, we have a series of different issues that we kind of tickle, every month that we go back to. So we'll hit a fire safety issue, we'll hit if there's an inoculation clinic, we have kind of a steady drip of public service information. So in theory, the West Sac Connect, have you tried this, have you seen this, that information should be, hitting the social media airwaves at some point, every month, a couple of times. I haven't gone back and checked to make sure that's happening, but in theory that's happening, and there was a big push initially. But the point is well taken that, people do forget, and new residents come, and if they're not, they weren't here when we did the initial launch, then they miss out on that. So I will go back and confirm that that's happening. But in theory, that's happening, and then we're looking in the future to expand some of the language accessibility there, so that's an issue too, because we do not have, for example, a capacity in Russian within this app at all. Much less, we're not telling folks in Russian that this exists in English, much less having the app available in Russian. So kind of language accessibility is another area where we want to expand.
Yeah, I think that's great. I don't know if it's English only right now or English and Spanish, but any efforts to make sure that the larger languages within the community certainly are being targeted is great, both in terms of outreach and in terms of the app usage. Looking through the report some more, or actually it reminded me, looking at the prevalence of when potholes are reported, again, it looks like it was in the early winter of the year when the rain happens and the potholes happen. Yep. Perhaps as it approaches that time again, either including it in the periodical public announcement, or maybe even a utility bill insert, so that residents can know it's pothole season. If you see potholes, this is a great way to report it, and hopefully it can be addressed.
That's a good idea, thank you.
But, so looking through the report, just had a couple of questions, and they may be more technical in nature then. In page 1 of the report, for figure 1, where it breaks down transportation-related cases by type, it has potholes and sidewalks listed, street signs, street sweeping, and then a broader traffic and transportation category that is the second largest. And I was wondering what's captured under that umbrella.
That's a good question. Do you know the answer to that question? 'Cause I do
Is
not.
it just sort of a miscellaneous catch-all, or what are these really common usage?
That might be signals, or,
I believe that would fall under traffic signals. We have several categories, though, so I'm not familiar with all the categories, and at times things fall or mislabeled into different categories depending on what the resident puts down as the particular issue. To give you an example, I receive regular reports on potholes under Transportation and Mobility Infrastructure Commission, even though that's not under the purview of the commission to review. Oftentimes, just because the word transportation is in there, anything that's transportation related falls under that. So we often have to go back and find out exactly what the issue is and then reprogram it.
yeah.
That leads perfectly into my next question, looking at attachment 1 on the staff report where it had the TMI Commission related incidents as an option. Is that just when people inadvertently are trying to report a pothole or some other problem, or are people trying to contact the commission itself?
No, that should be, that's intended to be a contact the commission, and I'm not sure, that's a new thing, and Chris Rankin, the city clerk, originated that based on a request. I don't know which commission it came from, or whether it came from multiple commissions, but there was an interest in having a functionality within Westsat Connect that allowed people to communicate with you all through this app. So that's why these categories were created. There's a similar category for all of the other advisory commissions. I think this bears some scrutiny because there's very few actual inquiries that come in through here, and I would suspect that the amount of confusion that this creates is probably sort of disproportionate to whatever benefit may be accruing by giving people a way to communicate with the advisory commission. So this might be something that gets looked at, but that's the intent, at least for now.
Thank you. No, it's good to know. To my understanding, at least, I don't think whatever those sporadic inputs on the app for us were ever reported, but if there are things in the future that it'd be good to know about.
Gotcha.
My final comment, though, just looking through it, I think that overall, the Westside Connect app, having hundreds of people using it, or hundreds of problems input into it, I don't know how many individual people are using it, but having that much use in the first year is great, and so I think moving forward, this is a great tool to use. So I want to really commend the city staff for having this program. And, it's unfortunate that in this first year, there were some hiccups in terms of members of the public maybe not always knowing that their complaints were being addressed or that their problems were being heard necessarily, but I think the steps that you've outlined in terms of increasing the public awareness that the problem will be addressed, and if not, it's because of this reason in terms of the prioritization that the city has, is excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
And the only other comment I had then, looking through this on page 2 of the staff report, I see it's written that as the organizational equivalent of the pickup truck owning uncle who relatives call when someone needs to move, the public works operations staff is called upon for a variety of tasks. I was tickled by that sentence, and I think a big thank you to the public works staff for doing so much.
Yeah, they do a lot.
Commissioners, are there any other questions or comments about the report?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I have a philosophical question. What I'm reading here is it seems that the pothole problem is less about actually filling potholes at this point. There's obviously potholes that need to get filled, but that seems to be getting done. But what seems to be the philosophical problem is that the communication that it's getting done doesn't seem to be happening in a way that seems to cover all the bases. Would you kind of agree with that philosophically?
Yeah, I think that's the most obvious area of improvement. I think the actual potholes are getting repaired very competently, yeah.
Yeah, and that's my sense too, is that the problem is less about getting potholes filled at this point, but communicating that it's getting done.
Yes.
And then I have some questions on the steps underway to improve city performance. You outlined 5 specific steps in the near term, and I was curious what the relative ETA of near term is.
We're working on them like now. I was receiving emails from Jesse even today about work that's underway in terms of getting, the canned response written. That's already being composed, and that, so that can probably get done before the end of the year or the very, first month of next year for that piece. And then some of the training things that I would say all of this, the near-term stuff by the first quarter of next year.
That's fair. And then I have one more question regarding the long-term piece about the CMMS system. Has budget been allocated for that? The long-term, you got a year of trying to implement it by Q4 2020, so I'm curious, when it says we are in the process of choosing one, where city is already in the process of procuring an enterprise computer maintenance management system, where in the process you guys are, whether you're soliciting bids, if you're getting demonstrations, if there's budget been allocated.
It's, I want to be careful so I don't misspeak, but it's relatively far along. I believe the selection has already been made. I believe the budget has already been, approved for that. So it's kind of the initial conversations with the vendor and contracting and implementation. But it'll take a while. Like that's a huge, enterprise software.
Yeah.
deal, but-
I think the parameters of what I was asking the question is whether or not this time frame of really up and running by Q4 2020 and really completely integrated by Q1 2020 is an integration versus a whole selection process.
No, that's the integration piece. The selection, I believe, has already happened.
Great, yeah, perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions or comments, commissioners? Seeing none then, the recommended action is just to hear this presentation and provide staff with feedback. So thank you very much, Mr.
Thanks.
Robinson.
Yep.
Moving along to General Administration Function Part 2 of the agenda, Item 5A, the Transportation Mobility and Infrastructure Commission calendar. Madam Clerk, is the next scheduled regular meeting January 6, 2020?
Correct.
Great, thank you. Item 5B, reports from city staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there are actually 3 reports coming in this evening. One was to be presented by Candido Ramirez, Senior Engineer with Capital Projects and Transportation. The next report is going to be from Sarah Strand, Senior Transportation Planner, also with CPT, Capital Projects and Transportation, and the final one from myself on the status of the Downtown Riverfront Streetcar project. So I'm going to ask Candido Ramirez to step up to the podium to do his presentation first.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez.
Thank you and good evening. I am here to present an update on the West Capitol Avenue Road Rehabilitation and Safety Enhancement Project. The project limits start at Jefferson Boulevard and they proceed west all the way to Enterprise Boulevard. It's approximately 3 miles of improvements. And the goals of the project are to improve safety and road condition. That's basically what it entails, what the goals are. And the way to accomplish those 2 goals will be to improve lighting, improve sidewalks, upgrade the ADA curb ramps, designate bike lanes, and improve signalization as well for some intersections. And lastly, upgrade the pavement condition along the corridor. So this initiated in April of 2018. That's when City Council awarded a contract to the designer. And most of the design and environmental clearance occurred within the first year. So by April of 2019 of this year, most of that work was done. And at that point, that's when we got a realistic construction cost estimate and identified a significant gap to construct the project. Since that time, most of the effort has been to identify additional funding sources and also wait for to receive some news on the grant that we applied for. Let's see here. So as of September of this year, the city staff and city council was able to find additional money to allow this project to move forward with bidding. And we hope we will go to council next Wednesday to award a contract for construction management services. So that will allow us to hire that consultant to conduct a constructability review and give us some reasonable feedback on the project before we bid it. Let's see. Once that's complete, we hope to begin bidding in January of next year, and again, return to council in February or March at the latest to award a construction contract. So as of now, the goal is to begin construction in the spring, March or April at the latest. It will take 2 years to complete. The first year will involve mostly the safety enhancements, and the last year or last few months of the second season will be mostly paving. And coincidentally, paving will address some of the potholes that Mr. John Robinson was discussing earlier. Construction will inevitably impact businesses, residents, and traffic along the corridor. So we'd like to seek your help in informing constituents, residents of the project if you get an opportunity. And if you have any specific questions, we're here to help answer them. And that's it.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. I have a question on, you said that you're going to go out for, award a contract for construction management processes, and then they'll provide some feedback, and then you'll go out to bid for construction. Is that a typical process within the department to have separate entities, have separate companies do the management and then construction, rather than both kind of design, management, and build?
Yes, it is. It's basically a form of QC and keep the contractor honest. And also, it also alleviates us from performing that role because it is fairly involved.
Okay, and they're retained throughout the construction phase to manage? Are they retained through the construction period to manage to continue QC?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so the first task that I mentioned there was to conduct constructability review. That's the small task compared to the overall contract for them. So they'll be there for construction management, inspection, and all the documentation that's required.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments, commissioners? Please.
I remember earlier when we had a presentation on this that there was some plans to also address some underlying pipe works. Is that still a part of the plan moving forward with the improvements?
Yes, it is. There are water pipelines and also fiber optic infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, welcome.
Commissioner?
Just on
your last point about the public outreach and the business impact, resident impact, I think is a really crucial part of the project, and making sure that there's proper notification. You know, there's a great diverse mix of businesses along that corridor that serve a wide, breadth of community. So making sure that we're able to support them through what is a 2-year involved process, that's a fairly large impact to a business. And I don't know what the phasing looks like, if it's block by block that's impacted, but having some resources available to let the public know about those businesses is an opportunity, I think, for the city itself, is to be able to not advertise, but provide information that those businesses are still going to be open during construction. I think that's an important piece of the overall project. Maybe an opportunity is to actually have a project page dedicated on the website that you can direct the public to, so you can give updates as the progress of the construction unfolds. I think that would be another opportunity to provide regular updates, allow us to direct people if we're receiving questions. If the city receives questions, having that one-stop shop would be another opportunity for helping inform the construction process. So.
That's a good point. And in fact, this construction management contract that will be awarded next week does have a sub-consultant, a public outreach specialist, that has a lot of experience with this type of project. So there will be a modest amount of effort dedicated to that.
Great, thank you.
Other comments or questions? For me, then, I just want to echo what Commissioner Parker said. I think going back as well to the previous presentation about potholes and making sure that residents and local businesses are being kept informed in terms of progress or any delays in projects is very, very important. My only question is, you mentioned that in April of this year, the significant gap in construction funding was identified, and then in September of this year, the City Council allocated additional money. Does that mean that the project is at this point fully funded for construction funding, or do any gaps remain?
The selected, there were a number of alternatives for construction, and we didn't choose, staff and management didn't choose the full project that's on the current plans, basically. It's a scaled down version. So the option that was selected is, for the most part, funded. I think there's a $1 million gap. And the reason we decided to move forward with that gap is that we don't know how the construction bids will come back. They may be $1 million below, they may be $1 million above, I don't know. So at that point, that's when we'll have to huddle up again and see if we want to fill that gap or trim back the project even more.
And so for the scaled back option that the city is focusing on right now, does that mean scaled back in terms of the length of the project, ranging from Jefferson to Enterprise, or is it scaling back in terms of doing certain streetlight improvements or sidewalk improvements?
It's scaling back, same limits, scaling back certain features. For example, signalization, not all the intersections would get the same level of improvements. You mentioned sidewalks. There are some segments on the west side that wouldn't be constructed. Thicknesses of AC pavement is also a big factor in cost. So we'll have to play with that to build what we can, basically, within the budget.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the information and the update, and hope to hear additional updates as the project continues over the next few years. Unless there are any other further questions, thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, the next staff member I'd like to call up is Sarah Strand, Senior Transportation Planner, to discuss the VIA project.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm just here to provide a brief update on the the West Sacramento On Demand rideshare program that is operated by our contractor VIA. There's two pieces of recently enacted legislation that will be requiring a contract amendment affecting the operation of the program. One was Senate Bill 1376, the Access for All Act. It was signed into law September 28. The intent of it was to compel TNCs, primarily those like Uber and Lyft, to provide wheelchair accessible service or other types of on-demand transportation services where they currently do not, or some type of equivalent service. Since then, the CPUC convened a working group. Through the rulemaking process, staff did participate on that working group, and the decision was made to implement a 10-cent surcharge per ride on TNCs in the state of California. That would be pooled into a competitive fund that there's still some ambiguity around how those funds would be doled out, but they would only be eligible to be used on creating new or expanding wheelchair accessible on-demand transportation services. The city has been lobbying the CPUC for an exemption to this rule because we do not believe that the way that our service is operated was actually the intended target of the legislation. We already provide wheelchair accessible service as part of our on-demand rideshare program, and it's unclear whether we would be eligible to retrieve the funds that would go towards this. In addition, for us to hold constant the flat rate that we currently have in place, rather than pass along that surcharge to the consumer, we would be using our public TDA funds to cover the cost of this, which the CPUC agrees is in no way the intent of the legislation. That being said, we were not granted an exemption when this went into effect on July 1st, so we will be needing to amend the contract to cover the cost, which will be passed through from VIA to us on a quarterly basis. We don't expect the impact of that cost to be more than $12,000 to $15,000, but we will be continuing to lobby the CPUC for an exemption, just based on the principle that we do not believe that we are the intent of that policy. So second to that is Assembly Bill 5, Worker Status, Employees and Independent Contractors Bill that was recently signed by the governor in September of this year, maybe more commonly known as the Gig Worker Bill. The general intent of this bill that was passed was to shift a variety of companies over from using independent contractors to employees based on the premise that they were misclassifying employees at the time. One of the primary targets of this bill, again, was TNCs such as Uber and Lyft. And VIA, who is our contractor, is also certified TNC in the state of California. So they are subject to this law. Admittedly, there is still a little bit of lack of clarity around what the interpretation of this law will be. Uber and Lyft and other gig economy companies have been very aggressively outspoken, saying that they will not be complying and they'll be litigating this and taking it to the ballot in November. However, VIA's legal team has taken a more conservative approach, and they do intend to comply with the intent of AB 5 by January 1st. So what that means for our program is that the hourly rate that we pay to operate the program will be increasing by roughly $11 per hour. We're going to be moving forward to City Council probably this month to work towards a contract amendment. We believe that we can work within the existing program budget by reducing the number of driver hours that we had originally planned to incrementally increase month by month through the end of the contract term, and that this will not have a detrimental effect on the quality of service. The original contract that we brought to council in May for the second year of service had budgeted in a significant amount of driver hours for the term, assuming that we would have the ability to incrementally grow each month as demand grew. Demand has grown, but not quite as aggressively as we originally intended or as we originally projected. So we're confident that working within the boundaries of this existing budget, we can continue service uninterrupted. But that being said, we'll be continuing to come back to both TMI Commission and the City Council pending their approval of this approach if any significant changes were to occur in the service. So that being said, I will stop there. If there's any additional questions you have, I'm happy to get into further detail. Otherwise, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Strand. Commissioners, are there any comments?
I do have a question. Are the drivers in West Sacramento, are they independent contractors? They were, okay.
Yes, yes. So VIA had been operating similar to their TNC operations in their own private markets, and the drivers on the VIA platform in West Sacramento are currently classified as independent contractors.
So when you talk about driver hours, that's not the hours of operation that VIA is offered, it's just the amount of drivers that may be operating during the day?
Yeah, it's the primary unit of cost that we consider. So it's the number of hours across all of the drivers in all of the vehicles. And it has all of the overhead built into it, whether it's insurance, gas, and other considerations.
Got it, okay. And have you seen, obviously, it hasn't gone into effect yet, you're not going to be able to ramp up like you anticipated. Are you going to be monitoring to check how your response times are for calls and seeing if you're still competitive with the Ubers and Lyfts of the world when you're?
Yeah, so our call center, in terms of like receiving calls, it's not gonna change anything in regard to that. We still have the same number of service hours for the support center, but in terms of response times and our ETAs, we have a dashboard, we monitor those things on a regular basis. Currently, we're just over about 12-minute average ETAs, and we're running about 860 hours a week on average. Even with the limited budget, because of the change in cost, we would still have capacity to grow to do up to 930 hours per week. So there still is room for growth within our budget. If we were to monitor it and see that wait times were really growing, we would be coming back to commission and council and talking about whether there was a desire to add additional funds to improve the quality of service.
Thank you very much. The one thing I might have mentioned at the end too, but obviously there's, I think one of the greatest desires from the West Sacramento community was the ability to move towards having trips generate and go into the central city as well in Sacramento. I know that Regional Transit actually, in offering their microtransit shuttle services, they are contracting with VIA as well. There might be opportunities to look at cost efficiencies while also opening up doors for that line of connection. So I would, urge staff to really look into that opportunity.
Sure, thanks.
Other comments or questions from the commission? Well, I would just say, I think it's unfortunate that the Public Utilities Commission didn't grant the city's exemption request. I think VIA is different than the larger gig car model that Ubers and Lyfts see around the world. I think it's a really great small city municipal partnership example. So did they give a reason for why they denied the exception request?
It had more to do with the variety of stakeholders comprising the working group, and I believe their concern was more, they were viewing it as a slippery slope, that if they gave this exemption for this instance, that VIA would want exemptions for their other partnerships, and then other TNCs would try to leverage that. So I've been told by the CPUC that this is not a closed conversation, but for now, they're moving forward with the law as they've decided upon it.
And as I said, I think that it's unfortunate, but I can certainly see the slippery slope argument behind it. I hope that as conversations continue and the door is not closed, there may be some space for an exception for smaller sized cities such as our own, using this not just as a gig company, but as a sort of quasi-replacement of our traditional bus routes. And if the city isn't successful seeking an exemption with the CPUC, perhaps it should consider also going towards our state representatives in the legislature to see if there can perhaps be a narrow targeted exception just for this very special case. But unless there are any other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, Jason McCoy, Supervising Transportation Planner. So the update I'd like to give you, excuse me, my cold. What I'd like to give you is an update on the streetcar project. As you probably have heard in the media, the streetcar project itself came in significantly over budget. I've also reported this to the commission myself. From that point, we've been working over the last year to try to figure out the 2.0 structure for streetcar and how it's going, the project itself and the funding that we've retained and had either obligated or were pursuing were going to be used for the project. I am pleased to report that West Sacramento, in partnership with Sacramento, has been working with Sacramento Regional Transit and working very closely with Congresswoman Matsui and her staff in order to devise a project that would serve both cities. As part of the streetcar project, there was always envisioned an extension of light rail connecting from Sacramento Valley Station to what was formerly Raley Field, now Sutter Health Park. That is a 1.5-mile connection. What we are seeking to do now, and what I have heard from Sacramento Regional Transit, who has just transmitted a letter to the FTA today, that we are going to be looking to reallocate the streetcar funding that was received to date, including $50 million in federal funding through the Small Starts program toward that project. We also have $30 million in transit and intercity rail capital program funds, that's TIRCIP funds, that were awarded to the streetcar project that we will also be looking to reappropriate toward that. In addition to that, Sacramento Regional Transit has around $17 million in remaining Prop 1A funds that could be used also for this project. So what we are currently doing is we've initiated discussions with FTA back in October. They had requested that we send a white paper, specifically that the project proponent, in this case now Sacramento Regional Transit, will be the project proponent, as they would be the owner and operator of this extension, since they already currently own and operate the light rail system, and they are the recipient of the TIRCIP funds that they coordinate directly with the FTA in order to work toward reprogramming funds. So what they've done is formally requested to enter into New Starts. So hopefully, I will be coming to the commission within the next first quarter of next year to give you an update on the progress of that. I don't have too much to report at this point, just to tell you that the connector project, as we're calling it, will be connecting the two cities. That has been identified by Congresswoman Matsui as a priority. She has sent a letter confirming that to Regional Transit, City of West Sacramento, and the City of Sacramento, and that jointly we are all working toward the same goal. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I can't guarantee I'll have all the answers at this point, but I'll give it my best shot.
Are there any questions from the commission?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Would Rayler Sutter Health Park, would that be the terminus of this, or would it be planned that this route would extend to City Hall here, and like would there be any changes to the alignment or the planned route that would have been with the streetcar?
So I'll give you two-part answer on that. So the first part is that the entirety of the connector project is within the streetcar alignment, meaning that we have the environmental clearance, both CEQA, that's the California Environmental Quality Act, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. We have the clearance for that project as part of the streetcar project. We are not intending to deviate from the corridor of the streetcar for that exact reason, because if we do deviate, it would mean completely revising the engineering, the environmental, and the permits that we've obtained to date, which has been 10 years in the making. So we definitely don't want to be doing that. So the answer is yes, we are staying within the corridor up to Sutter Health Park. Beyond Sutter Health Park, in the future, you may already be aware that Southport has long envisioned since the mid-90s to have light rail extending down that direction. And in fact, there are a number of policies in the framework plan that identify the town center as a terminus station for future light rail. At this point, I can't tell you what the future of light rail is going to be, but I will say that having RT extending light rail into West Sacramento provides a very good opportunity for us to address growing greenhouse gas emissions and congestion within City of West Sacramento, originating from Southport on up. So you can be sure that we'd be looking at this, at least we being the transit department or transit group for West Sacramento, as a means for providing future transit service all the way down into Southport if possible. That being said, we don't have the environmental on that, so that is a future project. Right now, I am just solely focused on working with our partners to try to bring light rail into West Sacramento to Sutter Health Park as was envisioned with the streetcar project.
Thank you. Add-on question to that. So I'm assuming that locally generated funds, projects within, improvements within West Sacramento would have to be funded by locally sourced funds within Yolo County and West Sacramento, as opposed to, say, commingling things that could be generated from Sacramento County, such as Measure A? Since
I don't know if I'm understanding the question. We have funding, I will put it this way. So for the funding for this project, for the connector, it is part of the streetcar project, and we do have funding for Measure V funds, which did specifically identify being used for the streetcar project. So that's $25 million from the City of West Sacramento that has already been allocated to that project. The other portions of it, those are also envisioned for the streetcar project through our partners, and West Sacramento was a partner in obtaining the TIRSA funds. We were a partner in obtaining federal funds. Am I answering your question correctly?
Yeah, I think that the answer is probably no. Like, basically, the SAC RT cannot use funds, local funds, like Measure A, sales tax,
yeah.
things like that, to make improvements on that, on our side, is what I'm getting at.
So far, those kind of discussions were a little bit far away from that. Right now, with this project, the only thing that we would be looking to do is to establish a maintenance agreement with Sacramento Regional Transit. So that maintenance agreement would be to basically allow access within our right-of-way for, rail servicing, for, general maintenance of the station that's going to be over at the Sutter Health Park. That's the kind of things that are in the agreements. Other cities, such as Elk Grove, have had similar agreements, and City of Folsom. Later on, there are going to have to be broader discussions that we have with regard to service. One, we are in the district, Yolo County Transit District. We are not a member agency with Sacramento Regional Transit, as some other agencies are over in Sacramento County. So there are broader discussions that are going to need to be had with regard to this service. We've already been working with YCTD and RT for the streetcar project, and we have long-held partnership agreements and memorandums of understanding for the streetcar project. The connector being in and part of the streetcar project means that we still maintain those agreements, at least to bring service over as far as Sutter Health Park. Beyond that, more conversations need to be had.
Other questions or comments from the commission?
What's the rough timeline of all of this happening?
So we have drop-dead dates with regard to the federal funding. We absolutely must have a grant agreement in place. So let me backtrack just a little bit. Assuming that Congresswoman Matsui and the partners on this project are able to be successful with the Federal Transit Administration in reallocating the streetcar funds to the connector project, we must use those funds or start obligating those funds in a very timely manner because we don't restart the clock from the time that they were originally set aside for the streetcar project. What I'm referring to when I say $50 million is the $50 million allocated from the Obama administration. I am not referring to the $50 million that was identified for a project, not this project specifically, through the Trump administration. So those funds, it is widely considered to be not possible because they've never specifically identified the streetcar project for funding specifically. The Obama administration did. So what we are planning on doing is working through Congresswoman Matsui's office in order to try to reallocate those funds specifically for the connector, which means a grant agreement by September 2021. This is an extremely aggressive timeline. So that means that because this is considered by the Federal Transit Administration as being a new project, even though this is still the same project but scaled down to just a 1.5 mile segment, that specifically means we need to reapply with the FTA through a Small Starts program. Our first step is what we've done today, and that is sending a letter to the FTA requesting that we be considered to enter into Small Starts grant agreement. Then at that point, we have a number of studies that we have to complete. We had old ridership data for the streetcar project. Given that 4 mile looped streetcar, there were a broader ridership that we were planning on hitting. With this project, we specifically are targeting everything from Sacramento Valley Station all the way down to Capitol Mall and all the way over to Sutter Health Park, encompassing the Bridge District and parts of the Washington District, as well as extending all the way closer toward Grand Gateway. So all of those analyses will have to be done. The next part of this is looking at traffic. So the traffic data that we had previously with Streetcar Project, it is a smaller train set. We are dealing with rolling stock that is a little bit larger at this point, and that means that we need to rethink how potentially we are going to look at things like freeway on-ramps in Sacramento on 3rd Street. How we're going to time the signals down 3rd Street, how we're going to time, if this is a Gold Line extension, for instance, we're dealing with 3-car train set. If this is a Green Line extension, we're dealing with 2. So all of these things need to be looked at a little bit closer. It's not that intensive, but it's just revamping it and resubmitting. In addition, we have a whole series of cost estimates that have to be done. We have new scheduling that has to be done. All of these things, RT is very, very familiar with, is we had to reapply every year for the streetcar project to the FTA. It is standard. So this is just the next step in the process. We're getting very used to it over these years, so I'm pretty confident that as long as our partnership holds strong and that we're able to reallocate those funds, that we will be successful with this project. But as I said, this is the initial start, so we'll see where it goes.
Other questions or comments? Well, I'll just conclude by saying then that, I think it's unfortunate that the streetcar project, after the time put in, ended the way it did, but it's very exciting to have this opportunity to increase public transit interconnectivity between the two cities, and especially given the city's decades-long planning to have light rail extended at some point further into Southport. This being the first step potentially is additionally exciting on top of that. So definitely looking forward to hearing what I'm sure will be lots of reports about this in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item C, future agenda item requests by the commission. Are there any future agenda item requests? Seeing none, and before moving on to the final item, just take a minute of privilege as being chair of the commission. This is our last commission meeting for 2019, and it's been my privilege being president. I look forward to seeing everyone in the 2020 year. At this time, moving on to item D, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Polhemus and a second by Vice Chair Crispin Kaufman. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.